Welcome to the Leaders Lasting Impact podcast. I'm Matt Pohl, your host, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Jamie Seeker, who's the founder of Seeker Solution. Just wanted to thank you for joining us today, and we're really excited about hearing about your background, your story, and how you're impacting small and mid-sized businesses. I was wondering maybe we could start with you just telling a little bit about your background, about yourself and your business background.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me. Yes, my background has always been in business operations at some capacity, whether it was like entry level customer service or, things like that. So I've always been kind of in the business side of things. My degree was that. I really was a numbers person in school, so I wanted to go into like accounting and something that had to do with money. And I had a really good counselor that kind of told me, hey, maybe just not be so, uber focused on your major, but kind of back up and get a more broad education and major in business administration. So that's what I did. And that's really where I was exposed. I had a lot of different internships and whatnot. So the history was always like learning about business and how it operates and that kind of stuff. And so that's really where my roles stayed my entire career. And then I kind of grew with different positions, moving up to supervisory. So then like overseeing staff and other people. And that entailed like training and just efficient work processes because it was kind of on my watch and things needed to get done. And so it was being exposed to that and doing that over the course of a few years, and then got into more decision making and problem solving type roles. And so it was like coordinator, manager, things like that. And then that became overseeing budgets and managing, expenses and really forecasting revenues and things like that. And so a lot of that started coming into play. And then making the decision on hiring and utilizing my resources, whether it's, COGS and coming up with the best way to be most efficient with your expenses and managing all that, or whether it's managing labor and hiring and performance management, all that kind of stuff. And so I really just had a really good career in terms of like exposure to different aspects of business. And that's how we got here. My journey was a little bit like unexpected or whatnot, but I think I've always really been in those operational roles.
Yeah, it seems like you really worked yourself up from the bottom up, right? Had a lot of those entry level roles and have just grown up through the ranks. Do you think that's been helpful in just you seeing kind of the big picture and how everything kind of works together?
Sure. For me, yes. I think, I graduated college in like 2001. So it was kind of at the time where I was like, well, I'm not going to get a job unless I get this salary and this position. And you kind of enter into the workforce thinking, you have these certain levels, and then and then you get to the point where you're like, well, I just need a job. And so there's a humbling in that, and I think for me that was the right path. That was really good. And I took a job that was not quite minimum wage, but it was very entry level, and it was very much like serving customers and doing the work. And I think everyone's kind of got to pay their dues, and some people do it while they're in school, which I did a lot of those things. But really when it came down to it, it was like, I'm on my own. I gotta pay rent. I gotta be responsible. I have, this education that I would like to utilize. So I was very focused on making sure that my degree was something that stayed with me and that I used that education. And so the careers that I chose, even if I was coming in at the entry level, there was always a purpose and like a vision behind, okay, this can lead to that. So right. I'm going to go in, I'm going to do this really, really well to the best of my ability and pay my dues. And I think we have to do that as business owners. I think we have to do that, as a new employee, like entering into a new career and whatnot. So for me, yeah, I think it was very helpful. It was the right path for my journey.
Right. No, that's great. Yeah. Sometimes when you don't have to go through that, you don't really understand what it's like to be working in that business at that staff level. So I'm sure that's been a great part of giving you a background for you to be successful. So you entry level positions, you worked yourself up through supervisory managerial levels. How did you then get into a place where you're a business advisor? You're actually helping other businesses.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think I've always been competitive. I've always been high achiever, high performer. I played athletics in high school and college, and so I think that always really stayed with me. And I think when you're looking at, I was always very oriented. So when I'm looking at my
Right.
future and where I want to go, where I want to be, it was never off on my own or starting my own company or anything. It was like, being a CEO or, managing a big corporation. And the way that things kind of happened for me, I was exposed to small business and loved the impact that I had there in my role. And I was managing a small business, and I was like, oh, this is great, because prior to that, it was much more corporate, much more slow moving in terms of change or things that I could see ripple effects of the decisions or problem solving that I was doing. But in this setting, it was like, oh, wow, like this is effective today. I see that this decision caused that. You can really
Right.
see that in small business. I loved that. And so, but I was really in a place where I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And the owner really was, it was their company. And so they were practicing their craft within their company, so that I was really on the business side of things and managing that. And they had decided to really kind of take a different, more active role in managing and kind of taking over the company. And so we really just transitioned there. And so it left me at this crossroads of like, what do I want to do? And in the past, my career had always been in the hands of somebody else.
Right.
And I had always had supporters, like peers and other colleagues and things that I've worked with, vendors in this situation, that always were fans of me and like really great relationally. I leaned on them, and they would always like be like my cheering section. That's what I mean by fan. Like they were always like
Right.
cheering me on, and really encouraging that way. And most of them were business owners themselves. And
Interesting.
so when I had that opportunity to kind of transition out of that, and it was like, what am I going to do next? I really didn't know. And I was kind of thinking like, all right, well, I love this small business thing. I think I want to continue down that road. But I mean, it was kind of like all of these business owners were interested in what I was doing next, and really, quite honestly, like offering me jobs in their companies. And I thought, I I kind of want to work with all of you, not just one of you. And it was multiple, kind of overwhelming a bit. Like, I am selling something here and they were trying to buy, and I don't know what that is, and I got
Not
to
sure
figure
what
this
it
out.
is. Yeah.
So that's where coming into my own company really came from, and putting together solutions that, when I was hearing from them, they were like, these are the needs that I have. They were all different based
Mhm.
on their companies, whatever they were going through, and quite honestly, their personality, what they were good at. So it was like, well, I'm good at this, so we're good here, but I'm not so good at this. Can you fill that gap? And so I was like, well, I think yes, all of those things are skill sets that I have: managing budgets, recruiting and hiring staff, and managing their performance. Things that I was talking about before on my way up. I was like, I think that these can be really great business solutions. And when I did kind of put that together and said, hey, I'm going to turn down your offer, but I'm going to give you another one, and I had my first clients really like before I could come up with putting a company together. It was just like, here's some, theory things that I'm like coming up with. And they're like, yes, I'm in. And I'm like, gosh, okay, cool. Guess I got to get a website. I guess I got to start an LLC, and so it was I think my experience was very unique in that way.
Yeah.
But I think that's where, I think everybody can really look at what they're doing and what their strengths are and what they're offering, because we are selling something, I think, without even really knowing. And people do want to buy. And I think that was my biggest learning curve, was like, I have something of value that other people and other businesses can use. And so that's how Seeker Solution was kind of came to be.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you had jumped out of the plane and were kind of stitching the parachute together as you went down?
You know what? I really know. I think that we have this idea of how things are supposed to be, like personally, professionally, like, oh, I'm not gonna get married until da 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 da, right? Or I'm not gonna do this until I blah 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 blah. those types of things. And I think in business, sometimes it's better to just ready, fire, aim. Like,
Yeah.
I have something here. I'm going to capitalize it. I'm going to provide a service to you that you clearly need. And I'm going to, as long, my thing was I was clear on my mission and I was clear on my vision. I knew what I had to do because I had this love for small business and I knew the gifting that I had that I could offer to other businesses as well. And so that I was like, I'll figure out the rest along the way. And I think that that's kind of that skill that I picked up with problem solving and being in leadership positions
Right.
for bigger corporations, smaller businesses, other things that, just kind of brought along the way.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, have you over time then found kind of a niche in certain industries, or do you kind of work with businesses in a lot of industries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think whenever I'm trying to put together like a marketing campaign or work with people on the outside, they really want to push us into this box of like, okay, well, what industry do you serve? And I'm like, really, like if you're building a budget, it's the same concept. Like you gotta make more than you spend, guys. Like it's not right. It translates to every industry. Now there are some industry like quirks and things like that, that like legislation or things that you need to learn up on. But the thing is that my team and I have problem solving skills. Like that's one of the things that I think is the differentiator between just bringing somebody on to help fill like complete tasks and bringing a team like us on is when you're faced with problems, how do you solve those, right? And so that's not really a skill that you can just determine in an interview or teach or whatever. And so I think that that's where um, that's where that's helped us. And kind of lost my train of thought there, but
Um,
what I was going at is just being able to problem solve and do that. I think is the answer to whatever need that they have there, and being able to offer that.
do you find that there are certain kinds of challenges that you see repeated at these businesses that you tend to have, solutions? You've gained experience. You mentioned budgeting for one, but are there two or three or five kinds of areas that you see come up frequently and that you're able to provide help?
Sure. Yeah. So I remember what we were talking about now. It was talking about specific industries. And I will say the common themes that we see are not industry specific. They're
Okay.
more owner operator specific, and the role of the owner and what they're doing. And they're usually wearing all of the hats and get to the point in their company's growth where they become the bottleneck in the company. They become overwhelmed, overworked. They have their hands in everything. It's very difficult to go from doing everything to then bringing on a team themselves and delegating some of that and helping that kind of go, because you really have to go from, and this is where I was getting at with the problem solving, you really have to go from like C level, right, to C level. But in a small business, you know that that's not very cost effective. You can't afford to do that. Every bit of that margin counts.
Right.
And so you tend to be like, all right, well, I'm going to hire somebody like for entry level stuff, but it really doesn't take anything off of your plate. And so it's really bringing on a team like us that can help come in at an expert level for like a fraction of the cost, and how do you maximize that in your results and in your, like I said, it comes down to problem solving. So all of it is, yes, okay, we have budgeting skills, and I think you can teach that to anybody. You want this to be more than this. You want your revenues to be more than your expenses. That's not the hard part. The hard part is, what are the numbers telling us? What strategies do we need to deploy to make sure that we keep that happening? And how do we predict that moving forward, and things like that? And I think that that's why we're paying people high dollars to come in at a C level and make those decisions, solve those problems for us. And you can't just go from like me, owner, okay, I hired a COO, guys, like you're going to now take everything over like that. Oh, that's a very big risk. And when we're talking about human resources being an investment, because they are, I think it's a very risky investment to take, because you don't have that trust. You don't know their skill set. Like I was saying earlier, you can't determine that over an interview.
Right.
I mean, very, very difficult to do that in a short period of time. Trust needs to be built and earned, and time after time being shown that. And so I think, we do see common traits and they're not industry specific. They're definitely owner specific traits. And most of the time they have a really difficult time letting go of the things that they do, even if they're not good at them, right? Even if they're not really the best person to be handling a task, it's like part of them, it's part of it's their name on the company, it's their identity, it's part of that. And so we really understand that, and I think that that's why we get a first hand view of like some of these themes that come out of it. Is yeah, it's really hard for me to delegate any of that stuff, but at the same time I don't want to do anything to change my situation. I'm always overwhelmed and overworked, and I know that I'm the bottleneck in the company, but like that's what we are, you know.
Yeah, where do we go from there, right? So would you say that the solutions you provide are kind of homegrown based on your experience, or do you bring in other kind of methodologies or concepts that you kind of incorporate, maybe blend into what you do?
Sure. I would say that none of the philosophies are mine. They're the ones that I've chosen to incorporate, sure. And I think that there's a kind of a customization in that. And that has to do more with my personality and my values and what I foundationally stand on as a company and what I want to do.
Mhm.
Sure. But I can't take credit for anything that we've done. Everything that we've done has been learned. We are a collaborative group of people that have different skill sets and different expertise in other areas, and we rely on each other. We all bring things to the table. We all have our own opinions and things, and we really try to formulate our solutions to highlight our strengths in that. At the same time, we're taking, yes, we have standard operating procedures. We use those. They're tried and true. We're practiced in them. At the same time, not every client we work with is a cookie cutter the same either.
Right,
So you have to really understand what they're all about, what their goals are, what their mission is, what their vision is, what they're trying to do, and then customize our approach to, you know, what they need and filling those gaps. And so I don't know that that really answers your question per se, but I will say that we're a group of lifelong learners.
yeah,
You know, all of us have, you know, continued education, and we're always learning every day, not always in the classroom, but by experience as well. And we're taking a lot of these business fundamentals that are just kind of core and implementing them, I think, with our personality, I guess
right.
is.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Maybe tell us a story of how Seeker Solution, your team, has had a lasting impact on our small or mid-sized business.
Yeah, I have heard. So our solutions are set up to be a temporary fill in a gap for a transition or a long-term partner,
Okay,
right? And I have heard from clients comments such as, gosh, you just did in 6 months what we've been trying to do for 10 years.
right,
And so it's a project based. So this particular story, company partners, they were architecture firm. And they really were trying to get out of like project management and that, and really focus on the business. The partners were, and so they needed to establish full SOPs and implement, like, hey, we need to get efficient. We need to be, you know, effective in everything that we're doing. And so they always had their ways of doing things,
right,
but nothing was ever like defined the way that it needed to be like, okay, we're gone. Is this ship still sailing without us? It
right.
was very much still dependent on them, their decision, that kind of thing. So we came in, we with our process management solution, worked on SOPs, and I think the key isn't just defining them. I think with us is keeping us on long enough to help implement them, because that's really the tricky thing. I think everyone knows, probably they have it in their head. So the process of like getting it to here and on paper and like defined is typically a pretty easy process for us, because everyone's like, oh, this is what we do. Da, da, da. Like it's very easy to get through. The hard part is the implementation. And that's what they've really had a tough time doing. And so it's really just setting up accountability and making sure that, hey, this is being followed, and putting in protocol when it is, and putting in protocol when it's not. And this is what we're going to do, and clear communication, clear expectations. And that's really what our strong point was in that project. And so when it was all said and done, and we were kind of looking back and evaluating it, and I had that comment made. And so that project was done, and we moved on to something else. And they had contacted me years later after we had transitioned out. We actually hired on an operations director because they got to the point in their size where they needed somebody internally.
Okay.
And then they called me later because they were running into the same thing. And they were like, hey, can you come back and do that same thing? And so it was like something that we had done years before stuck with them. And they said, okay, we know that this is effective, and we know that these practices like really worked for us. Can you come back and do it again? And so we had to do it with a new process. I don't even remember what it was at this point. I think it was more something to do with their project management, system. But that's like when you were talking about how did we leave a lasting legacy? Well, this is years later. Because they
Right.
were really one of my first clients. They were in this group of peers that I had that were like, oh, you're going to come in and like be our, ops director. And I was
Right.
like, actually, maybe not. And so that I got to do that really early on in what I was doing, and then come back years later and help do that same exact thing, because it was still happening. They were still using those processes years later, and it was effective. It was working for them, and they needed to do that in another area of the business. And I was like, gladly, this is exactly what we're here for. So that was
That
a really cool thing. Come full circle of like being one of my first clients to then, coming back home. It kind of felt like.
No, that's great to be able to see the fruit, right? To be able to look back into that organization a decade later and know that your team had this impact that was was lasting, right? And not only was it lasting, but they knew that that solution could help them in this new functional area that they needed the same thing. So no, that's
Yeah, and
very
they
cool.
they connected the dots. And also I think that was a really big piece of it. You don't always get to see the fruit. You plant a lot of seeds. You don't
Yeah,
always get to see the fruit. And they saw that that was attributed to the work that we had all done in the beginning. Because it was a very collaborative effort. We really honed in and worked hard on it. So it was like, hey, we know we could do this. Let's just make it, let's do it again. So that was very rewarding.
yeah, that's cool. That's great. Um, in your years of working with business owners, I wonder if you might have a word of advice, or maybe there's just a common theme that you see that might help business owners, small and mid-sized business owners, based on your experience. If you could share just some insight that you've gained.
Sure. I think it's just that you don't have to do this alone. You're not the first person to encounter whatever obstacle you're encountering. There are people who have gone before you, who have done it before you. And there is a much bigger community of people that understand what you're going through. Sometimes it can be extremely lonely, might be not the right word, but it feels like you're doing it alone. Some
Right.
of them, even if you do have a team, even if you have a partnership or co-owners, you're all doing different parts aspects of the business. So
Right.
but it's more just there are solutions out there. There is support, and you don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to have all of the answers either. It doesn't have to be you solving the problem every time. I think in the beginning, we talked about paying dues. I think that's part of it. I think that's why a lot of them have that mentality, is because when we first start, we have to do everything. I think it's part of the, part of what comes with it.
Right.
And that's a very important part. But another important part is letting go and watching it grow. And I mean, I think it can be just as comparable as like growing a garden, or raising children, or you know what I mean? It's things like that, where eventually your goal is to enjoy what's grown, and to let your children like go off and do that on their own. And that's hard. So I think the how, it's different for everyone. I think that that's up to their own personality, but what we see is the how is a struggle for a lot of people, because it's not the things that are being done. They focus less on the results of what's happening as they start growing and letting go of some of these responsibilities. They're looking less at the deliverable of what they gave away and more of how they do it. Well, that's not how you do it.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not how you do it.
Right.
But is it being done, and is it being done up to standard? And
Mhm.
we sometimes can get lost in that, and that is a very common thing that we see with owners. That I think that would be the biggest, if I can say one takeaway today,
Mhm.
look at the result of what is happening that's not on your not within your control. Look at the result of it and
Right.
not so much on how they got there. It is important. I'm not saying that because there could be more efficient ways of doing things, right? Like you could, but they could be doing it more efficiently than you. And if you're not open to a different way, you can get lost in that. And I think that there's something to be learned from that.
Yeah, I think your point of kind of, like you said, being alone, but not necessarily that you feel lonely kind of a thing, but maybe more isolated, that the weight of the organization is kind of on your shoulders, and that creates this isolation. But you're also correct, I think, in pointing out that because business owners just have to do everything, right? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it has to get done. And we've grown reliant on ourselves to make sure it gets done. That delegation is a key transition point. And one of the phrases we use at the Rewild Group is the idea of moving from an owner-centric organization to an enterprise-centric organization. And that transition is the hardest on the owner because they have to change kind of how they see their relationship with the organization. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay, well, that's great. I appreciate that insight, and I'm sure our audience will as well. Um, if a business owner, business leader would like to get in touch with Seeker Solution, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
I would just say check out our website, seekersolution.com. It's got all different ways of contacting us. So whatever is the easiest preference for them, whether it's our phone numbers on there, our emails, there's a contact form even, so they don't even have to email. They can just do it right from our website. We've got all of our social media links on there as well. So if they want to just kind of learn more about us and follow us for a bit, that's great too. So I think that they can just go to our website, seekersolution.com, and contact us, whatever they feel most comfortable reaching out with.
Okay, that's awesome. So, Jamie, I appreciate your time today. And JB's out of Phoenix, so especially if you're in that area, look her up again at seekersolution, no s.com, seekersolution.com. We'll put the link to her website in the notes of the podcast. I want to thank our audience, of course, for joining us today, and I'm sure you've identified some ideas here that Jamie's been able to share that can help your business and have a lasting impact on your organization. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.